and justice for all. And now I'd like to introduce Craig Schoeller.
Hey, hook me up, Don.
All right.
Okay.
You have to keep your voice up a little bit.
Every December about this time, when temperature drops and the cold wind blows and the snow falls on the pine and the spruce, my thoughts go back to 1944 and the Ardennes. The Ardennes is that wooded, hilly region in northern France, northern Luxembourg, eastern Belgium. And 4 times in modern history, the Germans have attacked through that sector. In 1870, Bismarck's troops came through there and invaded France in the Franco-Prussian War. And then in 1914, it was a Kaiser's turn, and his troops attacked Belgium and France through that same area of the Ardennes. In World War II, in the start, Hitler's troops bypassed the Maginot Line. Again, they came through the Ardennes. And then in December of 1944, in a last desperate effort to win the war in the West, Hitler's troops broke through a thinly held line with the idea of reaching Antwerp, Brussels, and Liège. At first, there was a lot of panic. There was confusion. American troops retreated. And it looked like the Germans were going to make considerable headway. But then brave troops here and there stemmed the advance. They blew up ammunition dumps, gasoline dumps, controlled vital roadblocks, and gradually the German thrust was thwarted. But for 5 weeks after that, the battle continued. It was the greatest battle in the history of the American Army. There were 90,000 casualties, and the Germans had over 100,000 casualties. It was a fight against a desperate enemy and against severe cold. So tonight I want to tell you about my limited experience in the Ardennes back there in '44, and then when I came back many, many years later. I went in the Army on 16th of June, 1944, 10 days after D-Day. I had been studying mechanical engineering at Penn for 2 years, and I had 2 years of basic ROTC. So I naturally thought I'd be assigned to the engineers, but it didn't work out that way. After the invasion of Normandy, the main concern was for infantry replacements. So I ended up in the Infantry Replacement Center in Camp Blanding, Florida. I had 17 weeks of basic training, and then 10 days at home, and then to the POE. And when I walked up the gangplank of that troop ship, I figured my odds were no better than 50-50 of survival. And if I did survive, I thought it would be at least 5 years before I'd return home. We had to defeat the Germans, and there was still Japan. And at that time, I didn't know anything about the atomic bomb. The troop ship was called the Thomas H. Barry, and it was the sister ship to the Morro Castle. Some of you probably will remember the Morro Castle, the ship that burned off of Asbury Park back in the 30s. And it was a flagship of the convoy. There were there were 12 ships in the convoy, and we were protected by 4 destroyers. The North Atlantic was rough in December, and there were a lot of seasickness. Well, we made it all right. We passed the Azores and went through the Straits of Gibraltar. And I thought then that perhaps it would be Italy. Italy would be our destination. But then the convoy turned northeastwardly, past the Balearic Islands, and we landed at the port of Marseille. The first night we stayed in tents, and then the next day we boarded boxcars. And these boxcars were the same boxcars used in World War I. And on many of them were stenciled the words, Ohms 40, Chevaux 8, 40 men, 8 horses. And we were packed in pretty tight. There were at least 40 in our boxcar. And we rattled along at 50 miles an hour for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then we stopped on the siding maybe for 3 or 4 hours. Other trains went by with tanks and trucks, ammunition, all sorts of war supplies. And sometime in these extended stopovers. The fellows would run into a town and come back with loads of French bread. And I remember one time, the whistle blew, the train started up, and these fellows came running across the field with the French bread, but they didn't make the train. So the MPs probably picked them up, but we continued on our way. There were two fellows in the boxcar that did a lot of talking. They talked about their uncles and their fathers in World War I and how they were going to show the Germans. So we just ignored them and looked out at the scenery. We went through Abington and Lyon, Dijon. Finally, we came to the city of Toul. And we walked about, I guess, a mile from the station to a replacement depot. The barracks was probably built at the time of Napoleon. And I remember it was mainly in a sea of mud, 12 inches of mud. And to go to the latrine, which was 100 yards away, was quite an adventure, going back down through the mud and back. And that latrine was an open-air variety. And the women from the village would walk by on the road. So there was no modesty in the Army, especially in France. We were issued rifles, we zeroed them in on a range, and then we came back and they said, you can have a USO show, fellas, if you prepare a proper spot. So there was an ammunition cellar in the basement of the barracks, and we cleaned out the debris and put in rough benches and a little stage. And we all assembled, about 500 of us, ready for the show. But before it started, a general came on the stage. I believe he was a brigadier. And he said, men, the Germans are making good progress up in the Ardennes. It's a tough fight. We're going to drive them back. Soon you'll be there, although some of you might not make it. And then from the back of the room, a fellow from Brooklyn, whose voice was trained in the bleachers of Ebbets Field, roared out, blow it out your ass, General. And with that, 500 men hissed and booed and jeered, and that general just walked off that stage. It was a triumph for the enlisted men over an officer's stupidity. And he couldn't do anything to us. We were already sentenced to the front. But then we had the USO show, and it was a tap dancer, an accordion player, and I guess a vocalist. But the show wasn't nearly as good as the enjoyment we got from booing the general. But the next night, we boarded the trucks and we headed east. We went through Nancy and Chateau Salines, and in the distance I could see the flashes of the artillery in the sky, and we went through one bombed out, destroyed village after another. And then the rumble of artillery became louder and louder as we approached the Saar. And we pulled into a town called Saint-Jean-Rohrbach, and we bedded down the house. And when we woke in the morning, we were covered with snow. There was a big hole in the roof of the house. But there I was with the 35th Division. The 35th Division landed in Normandy just after D-Day. They fought at St. Lo. They fought all the way across France, 5 months without a rest. And it was originally a National Guard division from Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. And the patch was something like this. It was a Santa Fe cross and a wagon wheel in the field of blue. Harry Truman wore that patch in World War I. He was the captain of artillery. So the 35th was part of the 3rd Army there in the Saar, and I was assigned to the 320th Regiment, Company F, 2nd Platoon, 2nd Squad. The veterans of the outfit didn't pay much attention to us. They ignored us because they thought we weren't proven. And they thought if they knew us too well, we wouldn't be around long anyway. So it was hard being a replacement. The first few days, there wasn't too much action in that sector, just exchanges of artillery fire, because the main battle was up in the Bulge. Then the orders came down from the 3rd Army headquarters. We're moving out, moving back to the area of the Ardennes. The 4th Armored, the 26th Division, the 80th Division were already on their way, and now it was our turn. So we boarded trucks about 11 o'clock at night and started down the highway. I I looked out the back of the truck and I could see an intersection or a church, and then 2 hours later, the same spot. We were going around in circles. For 7 hours, we were in that truck to go just about 70 miles. They didn't stop that we could relieve ourselves, so we had to use our helmets and pass them out the back of the truck. And one fellow dropped his trousers and sat on the tailgate, and his flesh froze to the middle. It was no glory in the infantry, but there was a lot of misery. We finally arrived at Metz after 7 hours in that truck, and we were so cold and so stiff we could hardly stand. But with a little hot chow, we revived ourselves, and then we decided to take a look in the town of Metz. So we crossed the Moselle River Bridge, and as we came around the corner near the old cathedral, we heard gunfire. And we saw two GIs standing about 40 feet apart with 45 shooting at each other, just like the Wild West. What provoked them to do that, I'll never know, but the MPs came soon and picked them up and carted them away. You see strange sights in the Army. So then we walked inside the old Gothic cathedral. I guess in 800 years, that cathedral had been witness to many, many wars. And now there were about a half dozen women up by the altar praying for the latest war to cease. And then as we walked back to the barracks, we saw a notice by the chaplain that he was having a service. It was Christmas Eve. So my friend Phil and I decided to go for the Christmas Eve service. And it was down in the sub-basement of the barracks. Actually, the barracks was called the Moselle Kaserne. It was built by the Germans in World War I. So there were only about 25 of us there. There were 2 evergreen trees untrimmed, a little portable organ and candlelight. There was no heat, no electricity in the barracks. But we sang some carols, we read some scripture, and then the chaplain came over and he said, "I'm going to give you a little message, fellas." He said, "I know it's a hell of a Christmas, but let me give you a message of hope. A hope that Almighty God will see fit to end this war, and next Christmas will be better for all of us." So Phil and I felt a little better. With a renewed spirit, we left the basement, came out in the open air, and then we heard a drone of a German recon plane. Searchlights went on, ack-ack fire went up, and we were back in the war. Next day was Christmas. No presents, no cards, no eggnog, but we did have a good turkey dinner. The Army did a good job that Christmas. Wherever possible, the troops got turkey dinners. And then we drew ammunition, grenades, cleaned our weapons, and prepared for the next day. So on the 26th of December, we headed north through Thionville, up past Arlon, Luxembourg City. Everything else was coming south. Ordnance, engineers, Signal Corps, refugees, they were all speeding south while we were going north. We pulled into Mortelang, just about 15 miles south of Bastogne. And we bedded down in a barn. It was nice, cozy hay. Be a good place to sleep. But we couldn't sleep because we were thinking about tomorrow. And then artillery batteries set up behind us and fired shells over our heads all night. So in the morning we woke up, we had breakfast, sea rations, meat and beans and a cup of coffee. And then we went into the attack. And we captured a couple towns, 20 or 30 German prisoners. And we had tanks with us, but the tanks were starting to have trouble in the icy roads, and they were getting steeper. So even though we tried to help the tanks by putting logs and boards under their treads, they had to give up, and so it became just an infantry operation. So we went down a big hill, we waded across the Sewer River, and came up a hill to the town, and then the Germans fired at us with machine guns. But we outflanked them, and we entered this town of Boulade. Boulad's in Luxembourg. The next day, we were in battalion reserve as G Company proceeded on our right flank. And then on the 29th of December, we went into a general attack. We left Boulet, headed towards Bastogne. We're about 8 miles south of Bastogne then. About 100 yards down the road, I saw a German lieutenant propped up against a tree. And I was wondering, why is he unguarded? And then as I came closer, I saw the reason why. He was frozen solid, eyes open, blue eyes, staring easterly to Germany, into a home we'd never see. And that sight just made us all aware of our own mortality and what was going to happen as we moved down that road. And after another mile or so, we stopped at a farmhouse. I guess brass were deciding what to do. We didn't have any artillery support. Division artillery was engaged in another front. We didn't have the tanks, so we were moving ahead as infantry unit. And on our right flank was the 26th Division. On our left flank was the 4th Armored. And part of our other regiment and the 4th Armored broke through and met up with the people from 101st Airborne. And Tony was in the 101st there in Bastogne. Ahead of us, we learned later, was the 1st SS Panzer Division and the 167 Volks Grenadier Division. And they were part of the German 7th Panzer Army. So orders came out to proceed with the attack. And another mile, we came across an intersection where there were 7 or 8 GIs that were killed by an artillery barrage. Apparently their unit had set up a roadblock and then they were caught in the artillery barrage. So we walked around them and proceeded down that road. And then there appeared to be a lot of air activity. One of our recon planes, one of these little Piper, we call them Piper Cubs, the civilian version, but they use them in the Army for recon. And then I saw P-47s and Messerschmitts dogfighting in the sky, B-17 bombers on their way to hit the German supply lines. And then we moved out in an extended line of skirmishers in the field off the sides of the road, moving cautiously ahead, when suddenly it happened. German artillery came in, 88s. The 88 was the Germans' best field piece. It was about a 3.5-inch shell, high muzzle velocity, and you'd hear it screaming and it hit you hardly had any time to react. And it was a frightening sound. And we were taking a lot of heavy casualties, so we moved faster towards the woods. And on the way, I saw the 2 fellows that were in that boxcar. One was face down in the snow, and the other was holding a bloody stump of his arm. The war didn't turn out the way they had expected. And as we entered the woods, we saw Germans with white tunics and sheets. They were hard to see. We were in olive drab and brown. So we made good targets, and they did not. There was rifle fire, there was machine gun fire. And then somebody cried out, "Watch out for snipers." The Germans were pulling back and snipers were covering their retreat. And then mortars came in on top of us. They hit trees and they hit the ground. I fell down, turned over a couple times in a depression, and the mortars hit all around us. And the ground shook and I could smell the cordite. And then when it stopped, my friend Phil called out. He was badly wounded. He was hit in the chest and in both legs. So I called for a medic. A medic came over, and we cut open his clothes and put sulfa powder in his wounds. And the motor bearers came and carried him away. And it was at that time that I just felt a burning, paining sensation in my right thigh, so I knew I was hit also. But we were pinned down by machine gun fire. We had to crawl down a draw and try to outflank the machine gunner. But then he pulled back, and what was left of our platoon went in pursuit of the Germans to find out how far they were going to withdraw. So after about a mile or so, we stopped, and I called the medic over, and I said, "How about taking a look at my leg?" So I pulled down, I had 2 2 pairs of GI trousers and long johns on. Sure enough, there were 2 holes in my leg. It was just bleeding slightly. So he said, well, get back to the aid station whenever you can. So we got a radio message to return to the company area, so we walked back. They were all digging in on the hillside. And since Phil was gone, my foxhole buddy was an Indian from excuse me, southwest of the United States. He's probably a Ute or Apache, and he wasn't any Geronimo. He just sat there in the snow, and I said, hey, Chief, let's go. Let's start digging. And he just grunted. And I said, come on, buddy. That hole's going to save our butts. Come on. And he just wouldn't move. He just gave up. He gave up. So I picked out a spot, and I started digging. There was a foot of snow on the ground. The ground was frozen. There were roots. There were stones. But I knew that hole was going to save my life. We had an entrenching tool. It was a combination pick and shovel. Maybe some of you fellows used them. It was swiveled. You got 90 degrees. You could make a little pick out of it, or you could straighten it out and make a shovel out of it. So I started scraping and digging, ½ inch at a time, hour after hour, making slow progress. After being in Camp Landing and digging in the sand, digging in the Ardennes was a lot harder. And about 10 o'clock at night or so, 2 TDs came up in the hill behind us, and they started firing in the general direction of the Germans. And then the Germans counterfired, but instead of hitting the TDs, they landed short right on top of us. And that spurred me on to dig a little faster. And about midnight, coffee came up, good black coffee. And it wasn't high mountain Andes or Colombian or Kenya, but it was the best coffee I think I ever had in my life. So the warmth in my stomach and renewed vigor, I still went back and started digging and digging, hour after hour. I didn't want to fall asleep, I'd freeze to death. I was scared and worried what was going to happen next. But by dawn, I was down about 2.5, 3 feet, just in time. The Germans moved up, and you could see them about 700, 800 yards away. And then they started firing mortars at us in sort of a grid pattern. They'd drop a shell, index at 10 yards, drop another one, and drop another one, then move up or down and do the same thing in the reverse direction. So after about 3 or 4 cycles of that, I figured it was about time to try to get out of there and get back to the aid station. By then, my leg was hurting an awful lot. So I grabbed my rifle, crawled out of the hole, and started crawling and dragging my leg. I got about 100 yards or so, and by luck, a captain came along in a Jeep, and he and his driver helped me in the back of the Jeep, and they drove me to the aid station, which was about 2 miles behind the line in a little town called Bosliden. So in Bosliden, they gave us tetanus shots, and there were 3 of us, 3 wounded fellows there. And we were sitting on the step waiting for the ambulance when we started hearing the shell coming in. This time it was a big one, 240 millimeters. And when they'd hit the house, the whole house would come down. So the ambulance arrived, we climbed in the ambulance, the driver zigzagged down the road, dodging the rubble and the shells. But we made it. We came back through Boulay, crossed the Sour River, and down towards France. And on the way, we stopped and picked up 2 officers that were caught in a house by flying glass, and they were severely injured in their eyes and face and head, and their heads were completely wrapped in bandages, and they were just groping, and we helped them into the ambulance. And then I guess we drove about 30 miles or so to the evacuation hospital at a town called Longwy in France. They took an x-ray of my leg, and then I went into the operating room. And it was somewhat similar to the MASH you saw on TV, with a team of doctors and nurses around multiple numbered tables. In this case, there were 6 tables, each with a team of doctors and nurses. And it was like a butcher shop. There's blood on the floor, blood on the walls, and the wounded came in, the wounded came out, and the doctors and nurses were doing a fabulous job. So they gave me a shot of sodium pentothal, and I remember counting up to about 7 or 8. Then I woke up the next morning with a bandage on my leg, and I was in a bed out in the hall of this hospital. And I guess I was there for a day or two. And then they took me down to a tent. I was in a tent overnight on a railroad siding. And then the next morning a train came in, a hospital train, olive drab with big red crosses on it. So from Longwy we went to Commercy in France. It was south about 40 miles or 50 miles. And that was near Bar-le-Duc and Saint-Mihiel, World War I fame. And it was near Joan of Arc's birthplace, Domremy. The hospital was in a French school of some sort. I was in a room with about 20 other fellows. It was warm, it was clean, the nursing care was good, and we were alive, and for that we were very thankful. And it was there that I had a chance to write home. It was the first time I had a chance to write home. And at the same time I was writing a letter to my dad, this Western Union telegram arrived at our home. It says, regret to inform you your son Craig Schoeller was slightly wounded in action 30 December in Luxembourg. You will be advised the reports of condition are received. Dunlop, Acting Adjutant General. You can imagine the heartache that was felt when that was received. But a few weeks or so, they received my letter saying that I was well. We all had frostbite, and we had our toes exposed outside the covers. They were sort of gray, and we had to massage them and try to restore circulation. And some fellows lost their toes. During the day, we read Stars and Stripes, paperbacks, detective stories, westerns. And at night, we liked to listen to the BBC. They played good music, Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Harry James. And Dinah Shore sang I Walked Alone, and Vera Lynn sang The White Cliffs of Dover and Lily Marlene. And sometimes we listened to the German radio. They played Lily Marlene in German. And they had some good music too, but they always interdispersed it with propaganda. The Germans are winning in the Ardennes, your troops are being slaughtered, 4Fs are seducing your wives and girlfriends. But Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, didn't know the American soldier. The propaganda had little effect, if any, and it was a good source for jokes. So about the end of January, they took out my sutures, and then orders came down from 3rd Army headquarters, clear out the hospitals, all wounded back. So I was discharged with a limp and a bandage and a rather weak leg. But from Commercy, I went to a town called Vaucouleurs, and across from the Repo Depot was a public shower. Now, the last shower I had was on a ship, cold salt water, and that was back at the end of November. So I thought a good hot shower would be good. So I went in, the woman in charge received my 10 francs. I went into the stall, soaped up, water shut off. You didn't get much water in France for 10 francs. So I had to come out of the shower stall, walk across the room, take another 10 francs out of my pocket, walk over to the woman, walk back into. So as I said before, there wasn't any modesty in the army, especially in France. So from Vaucouleurs, we went in boxcars again, this time down through Verdun, where there were a million casualties in World War I. And then we rode from there up into a replacement depot again. We went a series of replacement depots. In the meantime, the 35th had been transferred from the 3rd Army to the 9th Army. So that's why I sort of went around circles a bit. It was always a policy in the Third Army, replacements went back to the original division. So from Metz we went north, Thionville, Orléans, Luxembourg City, the same route I had taken just after Christmas. And I went through that same battle-scarred area from Orléans, Bastogne, Houffalize, all the way up to Liège, 70 miles, knocked out tanks, trucks, jeeps, half-tracks, fallen trees, down wires, discarded equipment, shot up churches, destroyed town, one after the other for 70 miles, just desolation. It was something that I'll never forget. Well, from Liège, we went to Maastricht. Maastricht's in Holland on the Maas River. I was sitting in a replacement depot there talking to a Dutch boy when I heard a noise in the sky, and I looked up and I saw one of these V1s. It's a jet bomb, and it was sputtering and a big flame was coming out of it, and it just kept rumbling and sputtering along, went right over our heads, and it crashed about a mile away with a tremendous explosion. And I thought, gee, things are bad at the front, but at least we don't know those things. So from Maastricht, I joined the outfit. They were along the Roer River, along the German-Dutch frontier. And I saluted the captain, reported back in. And then as I looked around, of the 180 men that left Metz at Christmas time, I only recognized about 40. The rest were casualty, killed, wounded, frostbitten. And the ranks were now filled by new replacements and by men who returned from wounds received in northern France. So the second squad leader was gone, assistant squad leader, the Indian, my friend Phil. I was the only one left. So now I was a veteran. I had received my baptism of fire, and like Stephen Crane's Union soldier, a red badge of courage. So I made new friends and started out on further adventures. We crossed the Ruhr, we broke through the Siegfried Line, we liberated towns and villages in Holland, and then broke into Germany. And then I was captured, I was confined in a prison camp, liberated. And when the war was over, I had no desire ever to go back to Europe. I had seen enough of the horror and the desolation. I just wanted to get on with my life and didn't even want to talk about it. But 50 years went by. And like the Civil War veterans who went back to Gettysburg in 1913, and members of Pershing's AEF who went back to Chateau Thierry and the Meuse-Argonne in 1968, we went back in 1994, 50 years afterwards. And there were 40 of us with our wives. And we had a sentimental, emotional trip. We visited cemeteries and battlefields. We drove from Lorraine to Normandy, into Belgium and Holland, a little part of Germany, and Luxembourg. And we left Luxembourg City and went north up towards Boulay. We crossed the Sour River, came up that same hill. This time, no machine gun fire. The whole town was there, right by a monument on the edge of the town to the 35th Division. The mayor and the other dignitaries were there in their Sunday suits with red, white, and blue ribbons across their chests. And they had a little color guard and a little band. And the women and the men of the town, the children were all gathered there. And they played the national anthem of Luxembourg, Star Spangled Banner. And then the mayor made a little speech. He said, "Veterans, members of the 35th Division, we want to thank you for our freedom." And then tears came to his eyes. And tears came to all our eyes as we thought how those people had suffered under German occupation and how we paid a high price for our victory. So the children then gave us the roses and we put them on the monument, and then we walked into the town. And Boulay looked pretty much the same way it did back in 1944. It had been rebuilt. Here and there were a few shrapnel holes and bullet holes, but it looked just about the same. And along the road, the fellow who was in charge of our tour came up to me and he said, "Craig, you were wounded here. Why don't you make the speech today?" And he handed me a plaque. So I had to make the speech. We went in a little hall and they were serving wine and orange juice and cheese and hors d'oeuvres and having a friendly little gathering. And then it was my turn. I said, "Mr. Mayor, citizens of Boulay, 50 years ago I stayed in a house down the road, and on the back of the house on the church wall, the German had written the words, 'Heute gehört uns Deutschland, morgen die ganze Welt.' Today Germany belongs to us, tomorrow the whole world." I said, how wrong they were. We liberated Boulay, we freed the rest of Luxembourg and won the war in the West. And in memory of that event, I want you to have this plaque. And then I had a little replica of the Liberty Bell. And I said our ancestors came from Philadelphia. Or I came from Philadelphia, and our ancestors back in 1776 declared our independence. And as a token of our mutual love of liberty, I want you to have this little bell. And he smiled, and he was so happy to have it. And the whole thing was a great moment. And then we had lunch. The ladies of the village had a wonderful little lunch for us, and everybody was friendly and gracious. And then it was our turn to bid them farewell and start on our tour. So we went right up that same attack road. I didn't see the German 100 yards from the town, but a little further on I looked down the side road and I saw Boschleiden. It had been rebuilt, but with fewer houses. Saw the farmhouse where we had rested, the intersection where there had been casualties. And then I saw the fields and those bitter woods. And as a history buff, I've been to many battlefields, from Saratoga to Yorktown, from Antietam to Shiloh. But to be at a battlefield where you and your comrades struggled was an emotional experience. I felt nervous and apprehensive. And as I looked out, I didn't see the snow. I didn't see the Tiger tanks. I didn't see the dog fights. I didn't hear the roar of artillery, the chatter of machine guns. All I saw was the ghosts of frightened, brave young men. It was quiet. It was serene. The Ardennes was at peace, and that was good to see. Thank you. Are there any questions? Can I answer any?
If you can still remember.
None were very when you were hungry, they were good to have. But I remember most of the sea rations, they were bad. Meat and beans, and we had some of them over in Europe that were labeled 1918. They were still left over from World War I. But when you're hungry, you know, anything's good. Yeah.
What happened to your friend Phil?
Phil, okay. Phil was severely wounded in his chest. Both legs were broken. He went to a hospital in Paris. He was in another hospital in England. He came to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, and then he was finally discharged. And it was about, I guess, a year later, I think I was still in the Army, and I heard from him, and we met, and he came to my home, and I went down to his home, and then we sort of lost contact. His father was a waterman down on the Chesapeake. And after he was discharged from the Army, he worked for the Veterans Administration, the DAV, Social Security Administration. His marriage broke up. He got tired of the scene in Washington. He went back down on the Chesapeake. And then, I'd say it was just a few years ago, I heard from him again. And his second wife had died, and he was living down in Annapolis. I went down to see him, and we've been in touch ever since. But his wounds are giving him trouble. He's a very lonely man now. He lives by himself. His friends are gone. And he calls me every once in a while, and I try to cheer him up. I'm going to call him tomorrow.
Friend of our love.
Yes?
Where were you on VE Day?
On VE Day? On VE Day, I was on the ship halfway across the Atlantic. We left Lahore, boarded the ship, and this was after we were liberated from the prison camp. So that's where we were, VE.
Did you still get kissed?
Yeah. Oh, that's another, that was a whole night's talk.
What was the question? What was the question?
How was I captured?
Okay.
Well, I can answer it very briefly, I guess. We were in Germany, about 5 miles from the Rhine or so, and we were pushing the Germans back. We were riding on tanks, infantry riding on tanks, and our captain had been killed. That same captain who helped me was killed, and the leadership maybe wasn't too strong, and they took a chance in moving into a town without any artillery preparation. And as we moved into the town, we were attacked by 88s and knocked out the first tank in a column, third tank in a column. The rest of them retreated, and there were 14 of us left, 6 in the trench and the rest in the house. And after a firefight, the fellows in the house were captured, and then we were in the trench hoping that we could stay there until dark without being discovered, but German medics came out if the tank was knocked out, and they happened to notice us in the trench, and the Germans came and surrounded us and fired at us and threw a grenade at us, and we all went up and said, "Comrade." So, and I was in the camp for two months, and we were liberated by the British Army.
How were you treated?
Well, you had gourmet food. For breakfast, we had 1 cup of acorn broth. Later in the day, we had a slice of German bread, which was made from potato flour and edible cellulose, sawdust. And occasionally we'd have a bowl of soup with some horse meat in it. It was a low-calorie diet. Yeah. They didn't treat us too badly. We had roll call in the morning, roll call at night. Most of the time, they just sort of left us alone. We had two guards, One-Eyed Joe and Herman the German. And they were veterans of the Eastern Front, and they had seen a lot of the war, and they were looking forward to the end of it. And we were eventually liberated by the British 7th Armored Division. The 7th Armored was at El Alamein. They came across Egypt and Libya and Tunisia. They landed in Normandy, went up through Belgium into Germany, and they had little black rats painted on their vehicles. And we were glad to see them. Cool.
How did you prevent frostbite?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Frostbite.
Frostbite.
How did you prevent that?
Well, you know, I still don't, my toes still don't have the right sensation in it. But I was lucky.
Staying in a nice warm place, don't you? How do you? Oh, I don't have it on.
Yeah, but we just kept massaging them all the time. And most of the fellows recovered all right. Now, some were, of course, exposed to lower temperatures for a longer period of time than I was, but you know, I had cold feet for about 3 weeks at least.
Did you have to ride socks?
Well, I had 1 pair of socks on, I had 1 pair in my gas mask container. But we hardly ever had time to change them. Things were There was too much action going on, really. The American Army didn't have really good equipment. They were not prepared for that snow campaign. Combat boots were just GI shoes with a leather strap on the top. Later, they came on with shoe packs, which were a lot better. I had two pairs of GI trousers on, long johns. I had a field jacket, and I had an overcoat, which I had cut off short. So I was layered, that was good. But the equipment really wasn't that great. And then, you know, in future wars, the design of cold and weather equipment has improved tremendously. And other things, they had little woolly hats that you put on under your helmet, and they always slipped up so that your ears were exposed. And then they had gloves that were long, sort of like felt gloves with leather palms, but the stitches were weak and your fingers always poked out the ends of them. Right, fellas? Remember them? But it was a battle against the cold weather. And I think that was one of the coldest winters on record there in 1944 or 45.
That's some of the statistics that I copied off of the internet and put onto the poster that's in the back. That it was the coldest winter in a long, long time in that area. And I thank you very much for all of the conversation you've had here. You've seen him looking down several times. I'm going to give a secret away. He didn't have any notes on his lectern. They were all in his head. I thought it might be appropriate to read something that during the past month I've been reading a different version of the war, Inside the Third Reich, by Alfred Speer, who was Minister of Armaments and War Production. And an extremely interesting book. If you haven't read it and you're at all interested, you might try it. He was charged with organizing a special corps of German construction workers sufficiently motorized to be able to carry out all types of bridge building, even if rail transportation should be halted, for the Ardennes offensive. And on page 418, he talks about the offensive. He went into the area where the Germans were, and he visited many different organizations, German outfits, while he was there. And he was under fire from low-flying planes and artillery and saw the ghastly consequences of a German attack on a machine gun position. It was impossible to convince Hitler that these were tough opponents, soldiers as good as his own men. He thought that the Americans would just fold and run. The Ardennes offensive, which we call the Battle of the Bulge, was Hitler's last hope for a breakthrough that would split the Allies and capture Antwerp, our supply port. And I thought, if we had time, and I think we do, I'd just like to read this one paragraph that he's got, where he meets one of the veteran German soldiers from the early days and talks to them. Up to the end of December, I stayed in the area of the offensive, visited various divisions, was under fire from low-flying planes and artillery, and saw the ghastly consequences of a German attack on a machine gun position. Hundreds of our soldiers lay sprawled in a small area. They had simply been mowed down. Late that evening, I visited Sepp Dietrich, a former sergeant in the old German army, now commander of an SS armored force. He had set up headquarters in the vicinity of the Belgian border town of Hoffeleis, one of the few old fighters of the early days of the party. In his own plain fashion, he too had parted ways psychologically with Hitler. Our conversation soon turned to the last batch of commands. Hitler had decreed with increasing insistence that the encircled Bastogne be taken at any cost. He refused to understand. Sepp Dietrich grumbled that even the elite division of the SS could not effortlessly overrun the Americans. It was impossible to convince Hitler that these were tough opponents, soldiers as good as our own men. Besides, he added, we are receiving no ammunition. The supply routes have been cut by the air attacks. So that's another view of what was going on. We just about had them run out of ammunition, just about had them run out of fuel, and they were putting in their one last-ditch stand, and even Hitler had said at one point in the book, he's quoted as saying that if this doesn't succeed, then I don't know what we're going to do to come to a satisfactory conclusion. But he had fanatically determined a scorched earth policy where everything of any value would be destroyed rather than being turned over to the Allies. And Speer was almost had himself killed opposing that idea. He was able to get it toned down a little bit, at least from the way he writes the book. Of course, history is written by the victors most of the time. In his case, he was a victor from among his group because he served 20 years in Spandau prison and survived. Well, we have, I don't know anything else we need to cover. One thing I wanted to do. How many are there here tonight that were in the Ardennes at that time in December of '44? Show of hands. My hand isn't up. 1, 2. We had about 6 this afternoon. And what division were you in? 101st Airborne. Were you in Bastogne? Okay. Next month, Jack Agnew will talk about jumping into the encircled troops in Bastogne to set up a drop zone for supplies. So be sure you, if you can, come back and hear that story. Any other, we've got time for a few more comments or short stories or anything you might have to say. They're going to put us out of here at 9 o'clock, but we've got a little time on our hands. If who's got a 5-minute story about something? You know, here's your chance. Use this so they can hear you better. You can hear it, but they can't.
Did you hear me?
No.
No.
This is something that if you do it, maybe somebody else will too.
Just a couple minutes. All right. I was with the 101st. We had just come out of Holland. We were there for 2 months, and we're in France for 15 days when they told us early at night to get ready. We're going to go take a trip. We didn't know where. So what we had done in the morning, I was probably dressed just like this as far as clothing goes. We didn't have any ammunition because all our stuff was being reorganized. So we grabbed what we could, and we loaded in open trucks, just like Craig did in these cars. We rode for, I guess, 72 hours, and we were just jammed in. We stood up. We had so many men in these trucks, and that's how we went into Bastogne. We went in on trucks, and when we got into Bastogne, we heard shells, and we were battle-wise, so we dug in the woods. That's where we had stopped. Then in the morning, we headed into town, and we saw all the GIs coming back, and we're going to head. So what we had done, we asked every guy that we saw, we took all his ammunition, his rifles, but we didn't have anything. And we went in with just about nothing. What had happened, as soon as we got in, we were surrounded. And we had, Taylor was in the United States, and the assistant commander was in England, and McAuliffe, who was artillery general. He took over, and what had happened, he got some of the anti-aircraft that was retreating, and he kept them in town, along with the cannons that we had. I guess, what were they, 105s? He set up in the center a setup where he could fire all around the town. And that's really what helped us. We set out, the day before, McAuliffe and another colonel, I don't know the names, Kennard, I think, they went and they surveyed the area. And they were smart. We were going to go in on the defense. So what they did, they picked high ground, and they put one regiment here, another one over there. And they set us up, and what we did, everything was crossfire. Our machine guns, the guys with a rifle were able to switch around, and this is what helped us, because when the Germans came at us, everything was crossfire. They attacked us at night 3 or 4 times, and the only way we could see where we were firing, we had the tracers. But Christmas Day, we were out of ammunition. We were allowed to fire 4 rounds as far as mortars and artillery. That was our ammunition allotment. And the day after that, Patton got through. And also the weather cleared, and that's when we got supplies. Yeah. But just like Craig said, it was just freezing constantly. And for a frostbite, we used toilet paper, pushed them in our shoes, paper, or anything that we saw. And the Germans threw artillery at us. And what was it? These pamphlets come out and tell us to surrender. Propaganda, yeah. And we stuffed that in our shoes. So we had it, that's how we kept our feet warm, because we didn't have
that for toilet paper too.
But we could see the Germans like about 3,000 yards in front of us, and I'm starting to shake. The second day, we saw them coming at us, and we couldn't fire at them because we had M1 rifles, and they wouldn't reach that far. So we watched them come, and they had tanks, and when they were coming, they waited till they got about, I guess, 1,000 yards from us. And then the mortars and artillery just opened up, and I saw like a whole German regiment just get wiped out. That's how strong our artillery was at that time. And it was just like us, we had an open view of a complete battle just with artillery. And some of the Germans got through, and of course, when they get through, we're, trying to wipe them out. Our casualties were 1 out of 4 survived, as far as Bastogne was. I was one of the lucky ones. And in fact, I had a German Tiger tank run right over the top of me. And what they did, they run on top of the guys, and they would spin around and bury them. And that was around the town of Bizery. And we just went on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th day. The 4th day was critical with us. We almost got wiped out. And our grenades were one of our biggest things. The guys that retreated, the first one we wanted was grenades, because when you went into house to house fighting, the grenade was your lifesaver. So we used the grenades to a great extent. If anybody was killed or hurt, first thing we did was grab the ammunition. And we grabbed German bazookas and everything like that and use it against them. So we had a a good group as far as the men were concerned. And we were surprised because when the Germans attacked, they always attacked one regiment at one time on one side, and they never attacked full force. This is what helped us, because we could switch our men all back and forth. And we had good coverage as far as what the generals did when they planned our defense. We were on the high ground, and we could view a lot of the territory, which helped us. And as far as food, we didn't have any food for 3 days, first 3 days. And I met Patton after he came through Bastogne. I had heard that they had food down in the town, and I told my guys, I said, I'll get down, I'll try to get as much as I can. And all it was flour and water. Well, that was pancakes. So I just shoved a lot in a bag, and I was on my way out, and Pat hit me on the shoulder, how you doing, soldier? And that was, you know. And I don't know, I wasn't shaved or anything. I don't know how I look. Yep. But that's real fast. That's what happened. We went in on trucks, and as soon as we got in, we were surrounded. But the artillery was one of our lifesavers. The way McConnell set it up in the center of town, because he could fire 360 degrees, and they switched every time we had a different battle. They could get on us. All right.
No, thanks a lot. I see a cap up near the front here, USS Franklin, CV-13.
My father's ship.
Okay, I thought so. The reason I mentioned that is that I went out to the Pacific fairly late in the war, and it was after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and I guess it was about April of 45, and the Franklin was coming into the Pearl Harbor just ahead of the ship that I was on going out to Pearl Harbor.